Welcome back, true believers and spectacular Spidey fans, to another episode of Spider-Man PS4 101. So even though we got tons of new footage for Spider-Man PS4 at E3 2018, there was one thing relating to the game that some of you guys may have not seen, and that is of course these actual physical copies of a Daily Bugle magazine covering everything that happened in the E3 2018 demo, along with showing off new stuff about the game's story. Now, if you haven't seen it already, Chris Baker did a really awesome job fully breaking down the paper and pointing out really awesome Easter eggs that you can find inside of it. But for this video, I'm going to be breaking down all the main story highlights of the paper, both for the physical copy as well as the online version, which you can read on PlayStation's website. And I just love how Insomniac, Marvel, and Sony are really trying to market Spider-Man PS4 in a really cool way by giving us new tidbits of the story with awesome Daily Bugle newspapers. And make sure to stay tuned every other month until the game releases in September for a brand new issue of the Daily Bugle newspaper showing more stuff about the game's story. So even though this one issue is jam-packed with new information, it's great to know that we're going to be getting new issues from the Daily Bugle every month. And I'm just really excited to see what's going to be put in for the new Daily Bugle paper coming in July. So starting off with the online paper, with the most interesting article that catches my attention is relating to Mayor Norman Osborn. And the column relating to Norman Osborn states, Osborn seeks THREE-PEAT, another round for Mayor Osborn, by Ben Urich. So not only is it awesome seeing the classic villains of Spider-Man in this game like Electro and Scorpion, but we're also getting really classic comic book characters in the game as well, like Ben Urich and upcoming Robbie Robertson. But we'll get into Robbie's story a bit later. So moving on with Norman Osborn's column, it states Mayor Norman Osborn has announced a third run for mayor. After City Council passed a bill ushered through by Mayor Osborn removing term limits on the mayor's office, Osborn's been cleared for a shot at an unprecedented third straight term. The city has flourished under my administration. I believe we can achieve greater things if elected once more, Osborn declared to the press. Osborn's new platform focuses on improving citywide security with promises to end the city's dependence on mass vigilantes like the Spider Menace by providing better support to the overwhelmed police force alongside other initiatives. He hasn't let us down. Could a third term be the charm for his administration? So it's really interesting to see that Norman Osborn is doing really well for himself and that the people of the city seem to be in support of him as mayor. And this column relating to Norman Osborn in the online version of the Daily Bugle newspaper actually appears again in the physical newspaper in a really cool way, so we'll get back to that a bit later. So the next column on the online paper is actually all about J. Jonah Jameson. So this next column reads, So long JJJ, perennial publisher finds opportunity in digital, by Robbie Robertson. The Daily Bugle says goodbye to its long-standing publisher J. Jonah Jameson. After decades of leadership, the fiery, headstrong newsman turns his attention to podcasts. Jameson dedicated his career to building the Daily Bugle into what it is today, New York City's premier newspaper, publishing hard-hitting news that delivers the truth other papers lack the tenacity to print. His fearlessness for compelling journalism earned him multiple top national accolades and a prestigious book deal. No matter how he does it, Jameson vows to continue delivering his trademark brand of gutsy news to the citizens of New York. So as we know, in the game, JJ has his own podcast called Just the Facts with J. Jonah Jameson, so it's really interesting to see how he got to that point by getting more of a backstory at his history at the Daily Bugle. And I just love the amount of attention to detail that they're putting in with a character's backstory like JJ's. And I know for a fact I can't wait to see how he acts out in the game. So moving on from Mayor Norman Osborn and J. Jonah Jameson, we actually have a really interesting column relating to the Kingpin. So this specific column reads, FISK'S Manifest Destiny. It's Fisk's world. We just live in it, by Kat Farrell. Next to the word Monopoly is a picture of Wilson Fisk, CEO of Fisk Construction. His cranes dominate the skylines while his branded steel beams support the skeletons of the majority of NYC's highest skyscrapers. Since the city is essentially his, Fisk looks overseas to expand his empire. Some worry about his global aspirations, but who cares when he single-handedly rescued our middle-class blue-collar workers? Hundreds of once unemployed New Yorkers now work, while businesses worldwide flock for space at any of Fisk's commercial towers. Fisk is so successful, he even pours his own earnings back into new projects. While this sounds shady, it's better when a self-made mogul self-finances in lieu of using taxpayer dollars. He can grow his company across oceans and worlds if he wants. With so much of the NYC skyline influenced by the mogul, this is Fisk's world. We're just living in it, or in reality, renting it. So it's really interesting to see that Kingpin is looked upon in this specific Daily Bugle article, that he is this nice businessman that's actually helping the city, but later on in the physical Daily Bugle newspaper, that actually changes. And wrapping up the online version of the Daily Bugle newspaper is a really interesting part about Black Cat. So this column reads, Penthouses Pilfered, no leads on who's looting the rich, by Betty Brandt. A string of robberies targeting NYC's elite have police scratching their heads. Who's foolish enough to target New York City's rich and powerful? Apparently someone familiar with sophisticated home security systems, the likes of which are normally reserved for art museums and diamond importers. Authorities lack any leads confirming whether the break-ins are executed by a single thief or a ring of criminals. Inside sources claim the culprit leaves a calling card at each crime scene, at least confirming police hunches that it's no common common crook burgling our city's elite. The city's wealthiest families demand justice, cranking the heat up to full blast on police to crack this case. And if they continue to fail, some suggest victims will invite outside forces to demystify the $1 Million Bandit and bring them into custody. So as we read in the Game Informer magazine back in April, it is confirmed that Black Cat is in fact going to be in Spider-Man PS4, and she is actually leaving little Black Cat statuettes for Spider-Man to find. And even though I'm not too sure if she's going to be in the main story of the game, we do know that she is going to be involved within the City That Never Sleeps DLC pack of the game. And I know for a fact I'm really excited to see how Black Cat looks and acts in the game. So moving on from the online Daily Bugle website, we are actually going to look at the physical Daily Bugle newspaper that you could have picked up while you were at E3. And like I said earlier, there are lots of Easter eggs to be found within this newspaper, but I'm mainly going to be going over the story aspects of it. So the first thing to point out that's really important to know is that after the Raft breakout mission, it's actually confirmed that the villains are on a rampage in New York City. Vulture is actually circling the skies of New York, Rhino's actually bringing down buildings, Electro is sparking up Midtown, and Scorpion is just robbing people. And given how intense that Electro chase was in the Raft mission, I can't wait to see how you can fight these bosses in the full game. So the next really interesting point of this paper is that the subway fight that Mr. Negative and Spider-Man have is actually causing lots of damage to the New York City subway system after their fight. So in the newspaper, it describes that Spider-Man and Mr. Negative hopped from train to train in the subway fight, and after the whole battle was finished, it left the entire New York City subway system destroyed. And just by seeing that one clip in the Paris Games Week trailer just gets me super excited to see how the full boss fight's actually going to turn out. And even adding on to how crazy that boss fight is, it actually turns out that Spider-Man goes missing after that subway battle. So I'm not too sure if this means that Peter took a small break of being Spider-Man after that full subway fight, or he actually might have gotten taken hostage by Mr. Negative. But I know for a fact I'm really excited to see what happens when that battle occurs in the game. So the next really interesting point that relates to the story of the game is that in the paper there is an advertisement for getting a job at Oscorp Industries, and the specific point that is brought up is for assistant lab technicians. And since we know in Spider-Man PS4 Peter Parker just graduated college and he is a scientist, I do think this is a possibility that this is his job in the game. Plus, given how Harry Osborn is actually asking Peter to investigate some Oscorp research stations, it doesn't seem all that far-fetched that Peter could be working on the inside at Oscorp. And moving along with the paper, we already know that it is confirmed that the New York City in Spider-Man PS4 is in fact Marvel's New York, so we get lots of references to the Avengers Tower, the Wakandan Embassy, Doctor Strange's Sanctum Sanctorum, and the newest one on the list is actually Daredevil. And as the ad reads, it states, blindsided by legal trouble, dare to be represented by Nelson and Murdoch, attorneys at law. We'll see to it that justice is served. And I just love that reference to Daredevil in this newspaper, and hopefully that means we could see other landmarks relating to Daredevil like Fogwell's gym, or maybe even character references like the Defenders. Since this is Marvel's New York after all, it wouldn't be too insane to actually see more Marvel characters be name dropped or referenced within the story of the game. But still, I'm just very excited to see all the possible hero cameos that we could get in the game. So moving on to another part of the newspaper is actually discussing what happens after Wilson Fisk is arrested. So like we know already, after Wilson Fisk is arrested, the Inner Demons and Mr. Negative actually come out in New York City to try and become the new kingpins of crime. Since Wilson Fisk was seen as the biggest criminal threat in New York City, after he gets arrested, Mr. Negative and a bunch of other villains come out to try and reign supreme in the criminal underworld. And not only that, but it's also said along with Fisk's arrest, we actually see crooked cops that are actually working alongside of Fisk as well. So not only is it crazy seeing that there's going to be lots of other villains trying to take control of the New York City crime underworld, but it's also crazy that tons of cops were actually working with Wilson Fisk to help him out with his crimes. And I'm just really excited to see this part of the story be played out. So moving on to another really interesting part of the newspaper, it's actually confirmed that people will discover that Martin Lee and Mr. Negative are the same person. So this newspaper doesn't really disclose when this takes place in the story or how the civilians actually discover that Mr. Negative and Martin Lee are the same person, but it's really interesting that they do find out regardless. I'm assuming after the subway fight, people are going to discover that somehow Martin Lee is Mr. Negative after fighting Spider-Man, and they're going to turn on him and side with Spidey after that fight. But it's really crazy to see that Lee's identity will be exposed to the public at some point in the game, and I'm really excited to see how that's going to play out in the story. So the next really interesting point about the paper is that the city will be put under martial law after Mayor Norman Osborn releases his private military force to secure the city. So it seems like after the Raft breakout mission, Norman Osborn as mayor actually orders a private military force to secure New York City by actually putting the city under martial law. And in the newspaper, it describes that the city is slightly turning more and more into a war zone given all the soldiers that are patrolling the streets. And this actually relates to one of the Game Informer podcasts where they talked about playing Spider-Man PS4 for the first time and stated that one part of the game looked like a bomb had gone off in the city. And seeing how as the story progresses, the city is going to become more and more dangerous for you to explore around, it's going to be really interesting to see what that means for gameplay. It seems like these soldiers are going to prove more of a challenge for Spider-Man, and they're actually going to be patrolling the streets in a faster rate. And I don't know about you, but but that just gets me really excited to see how that's going to be played out in the game. So the second to last point that's brought up in this newspaper is actually a really interesting column about Mary Jane. Not only does it show that she writes an entire column about Miles Morales in the newspaper, but it actually is confirmed that she is running the webcast for the Daily Bugle. Since we do know that Mary Jane is a journalist in the game and we can actually play as her, it's also really cool to see that she runs the webcast for the Daily Bugle in the game. So even though JJ has his own show called Just the Facts, Insomniac did confirm that you can listen to different stations while swinging around the city, and this seems like to be one of them. And I can't wait to see how Mary Jane's going to be talking about Spider-Man in the game, given that she does know that Peter is Spider-Man in the story. And moving on to the last important story highlight of this newspaper is that when Spider-Man makes his advanced suit, also known as the white spider suit that we see in the game, it appears that the civilians are going to react in a really cool way. And in the Daily Bugle newspaper, it specifically described that the civilians are really liking Spider-Man's new look in the game. And since we know that the white spider symbol is actually important for the story, I'm really curious to see what it's actually going to represent in the full game. And I just can't wait to see how the civilians in the city streets are going to react to Spider-Man's new suit. But anyways, guys, that's all the Daily Bugle news I have for you today. Let me know all your thoughts in the comment section down below. What did you think about these papers, and what do you think the next issue of the Daily Bugle is going to be about? I know for a fact I'm loving every single piece of the Daily Bugle news that we're getting, and I just love reading one of these papers physically because it's gorgeous. But anyways, guys, thank you all so much for watching. Stay spectacular, Spidey fans. Peace out.
It's all over town, Robbie. Gossip, rumors, panic in the streets. We're lucky. Crazy scientist turns himself into some kind of a monster. 4 mechanical arms welded right onto his body. Guy named Otto Octavius winds up with 8 limbs. What are the odds? Hoffman! Yeah?